Guys, sorry I'm not there today. I'm off in some meetings in Colombia, but I want to make sure that we continue our look at period four. We're dealing with the political layer right now, a continuation of our class on Friday, looking at presidents and kind of the politics, both domestic and foreign, that happened in each of their presidencies. So today we're looking at Monroe and the Era of Good Feelings, going into how the two-party system reemerges after his presidency with Quincy Adams, Jackson, and then just a little peek at presidential politics beyond that. So let's get started. All right, the last time we were together, we ended off with the War of 1812. And one of the big outcomes of the War of 1812 was the fact that the Federalist Party loses popularity because they opposed the war. Well, another factor in the disappearance of the Federalist Party isn't about them losing favor, but the Democratic Republicans gaining favor. And that's why I have this map here. Now, these maps, what you're seeing across these maps is how voting requirements change over time. And we go from 1800, where a lot of states require property to be able to vote, to 1860, where it's just universal, all adult white males can vote. Now, this was happening for a number of reasons, all having to do with the gaining of territory in the West and how much that makes people move around. In 1803 with the Louisiana Purchase, that causes a lot of movement westward, and we can see that with the creation of all these new states out here. And it means that people aren't staying put like they used to. They put property qualifications on voting in the colonial era because it was supposed to show that you were a settled, committed member of the community. And that doesn't, I mean, that's kind of passe by the time we get into the 1800s. People aren't as likely to stay put, and they are much more likely to move around. And people don't see that as necessary, especially now that we've got this constitution and it's a government of all the people across the entire country. There's a much more unified sense that we are a country. You're not a citizen of an individual state, but you're a citizen across the country. So that's another reason to kind of drop that property qualification. Now, what this has to do with political parties is the fact that this allows a lot of lower class individuals who did not own property before this to now be able to vote. And they tend to vote for the Democratic Republicans because the Federalists are the party of kind of big business. They're about finance and industry, and that's just not something that's going to appeal to lower class voters. And so the Democrats actually get a lot more voters because of this change in voting qualifications. So just another thing that's bringing in what is called the era of good feelings. Now let's look at the Electoral College votes for 1816 and 1820. In the Electoral College, whatever that group of people that form the Electoral College, whatever they decide, they have to decide all together. It's not like electors can decide some for this and others for that, though a couple states do that, but most of them don't. So they tend to go between the two big political parties. And here you see in 1816 that the Democratic Republican Monroe is getting the vast majority of the votes. Notice this: 84% of the electoral votes are going to Monroe. We see a little lingering of the Federalist Party, and notice that kind of sectionalism, that North versus South. That's not going to come back for a while. We're going to see a wide popularity, or a wide swath of popularity, for the Democratic Republicans. And certainly, check this out. 1820, the Democratic Republicans, that's it. Now you do see this independent Republican kind of hinting that there's maybe some division within, but not much. Just whatever the heck is happening here. New Hampshire apparently split their vote. So that's interesting, but we'll get back to that. So this is a clear indication that we've got one political party. Now let's talk about who this fabulous guy James Monroe was, that everybody loved him so much. I don't know that it's necessarily everybody loved James Monroe. He was considered a handsome fellow at the time. Look at that looker. And he was kind of, just well liked. So since there's no Federalists and all the Democratic Republicans seem to like the dude, we go with him. So he is in the air of good feelings. So if you're putting this on your chart, domestically, we have the air of good feelings. It's the end of the Federalist Party, and where just the Democratic Republicans are literally the only political party in national politics. Now, that does not mean that everything was just smooth sailing and everything is perfect. We still have a couple of issues domestically that mess with everybody's years, particularly the Panic of 1819. Now, the Panic of 1819 is actually the first big economic crisis of the 19th century. It kind of starts off our boom bust cycle that we still live in. The economy goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. The Panic of 1819, we don't call it a recession or a depression like we would in modern times, because recession and depression have to deal with the level of gross domestic product, and we didn't measure that back in the 1800s, so we can't use that term. But in more general, if you just want to call it like they were in a recession or they were in a depression, people lost a lot of money. People went bankrupt. The jobs were more scarce. There's a couple factors of this. Number one, the end of those Napoleonic Wars in Europe. A couple of years later, it means that Europe is now going back to producing farm goods and manufacturing like they used to, and that makes our products not less competitive, but that we have more competition internationally. So our exports fall. Second of all, Britain is colonizing India, and India is starting to produce a lot of cotton, and that is messing with the price of cotton on the international market. So that entire southern economy takes a hit. And then third, throwing it back to the Federalists for a second, as you hopefully remember, that part of Hamilton's financial plan was a national bank. Well, Jefferson kills off the national bank during his presidency. And so we're left with a bunch of state banks. And during this, let's go back here, this movement here westward, all of this land is being sold, and state banks, in order to facilitate those sales, start printing a lot of money. And that causes inflation, number one. But then, as we're going to talk about in a little bit, some of the Democratic Republicans during James Monroe's presidency start up a second national bank because they're worried that the finances are going crazy in the country. And the national bank starts to demand payment of debts in hard currency, which is silver-backed money. You don't need to know all of this. I'm just geeking out economically on you. I'm sorry. And that also causes a lot of problems. If you want to hear about more of that later, I will tell you about it. But just know, Panic of 1819, competition in Europe, competition in the cotton market because of Indian cotton, and also bad monetary policy by state banks caused this panic. That being said, and that's the economic news. The political news in James Monroe's presidency is the Missouri Compromise. That's our last domestic thing. If you want to go ahead and shoot the Monroe Doctrine over into foreign, this is actually going to get covered tomorrow in the recorded lecture I've done, so I'm just going to not say anything more about that. But obviously it's him. Notice Monroe Doctrine, James Monroe. So I want to talk more about this thing called the Missouri Compromise, because you do need to know some details about this. Okay, so the Missouri Compromise. Here's the story. In 1819, we have all of these solid teal states and all of the solid burgundy states, and the teal states are free states and the burgundy states are slave states, and it's equal. It's 11 and 11. When in 1819, Missouri petitions to become a state. And it just so happens that some guy, James Talmadge, I believe, you don't need to know that, suggests in Congress that they make Missouri a free state, because he says it's on the other side of the Mississippi River. Remember, the Mississippi River's right here. And that would be a good limit to where slavery can extend. And the southern state delegates lose their flippin' minds over that, because they're interested. Think back to our discussion on market revolution, think about all those black dots of cotton. They want that cotton to extend over here, and if you're going to grow the cotton, you're going to need the slaves. So they lose their freaking minds over that. Even suggests seceding, but remember that was not too uncommon. New England had suggested seceding during the War of 1812, so that was kind of a common, we're out of here, we're not going to stay anymore, kind of thing. But cooler heads prevail. Our friend Henry Clay here, one of the war hawks in the War of 1812, he's emerging as a real leader in Congress. He says we could work this out, and he makes a compromise, the Missouri Compromise. This is happening in 1820. It goes into effect 1821. He says, well, we'll keep the balance. We'll make Missouri a slave state because there already were a couple of plantations, like cotton plantations down here that had slaves. So he was like, we'll make Missouri a slave state. You know, this part of Massachusetts has been wanting to be separate because, like, Massachusetts, it's right here. Why this is also Massachusetts is a weird quirk of colonization. So it's like, we'll let Maine be its own thing. So Maine will come in as a free state. That'll keep balance, 12 and 12. And then we'll just draw a line. We'll just be like, hey, draw a line. Everything below it is going to be slave territory, open to slavery, because, again, this is what's likely going to be cotton growing area. Everything above it is going to be free, you know, except for Missouri, is going to be free because this is not really good for cotton growing over here. So everything over here is going to be free. Everything down here is going to be slave. The cotton plantations can have their slaves and everybody else can be free. And everybody will be fine forever. It'll be wonderful. These states with the triangles end up becoming states under the Missouri Compromise law or provisions, and so Florida and Arkansas has slaves, whereas Iowa, Wisconsin, and Michigan do not. And so everybody feels good about that. It's like a little crisis, and then it goes away, and we're all happy. You know, until 1824. Now let's look at this electoral college map. Let's see, this is 1820's electoral college map. This is 1824. You can see something crazy has happened, and that crazy thing is the breakup of the Democratic Republicans into their own factions. So now we have factions within factions. And let me tell you the story. So what's happening is the at this time, it was common for the members of the House of Representatives to suggest who should be considered for president, not run for president, who should be considered, and they gave a list to the electoral colleges for consideration. Now, there were, since Congress was all full of Democratic Republicans, they had formed these little cliques inside, and these 4 cliques nominated 4 different people. John Quincy Adams, son of former President John Adams, Andrew Jackson, hero of the War of 1812, Michael Crawford, who he did something and I can't remember what it is. You can tell he doesn't win. And Henry Clay, you know, the Missouri Compromise guy. And so when the Electoral College results come back, it's too split for anybody to have the majority. Now, when that happens, it goes to the House of Representatives. Now, it just so happened that Henry Clay was Speaker of the House, so he had a lot of sway over the House of Representatives. And let me tell you what happened. Crawford ends up having a stroke before they can decide. He doesn't die, but he's, you know, kind of no longer considered eligible. So it's really between Jackson and John Quincy Adams. And they don't like each other. And Henry Clay has started to not like Andrew Jackson. And so he supposedly, there's no proof of this, but he supposedly got people to, but he didn't think he was going to win, because see, he's not winning a whole lot, if you'll notice that. He's like, I'm not going to win. I really don't want Jackson to be president, so I'm going to suggest that people vote for John Quincy Adams. And they do, and John Quincy Adams is declared the winner. Now, Andrew Jackson, surprisingly, doesn't challenge him to a duel. It might have been illegal in most places by then and frowned upon, but he's going to exact his revenge soon. So this is called the disputed election of 1824, and it's clear that that era of good feelings was a short-lived era. Now, politics in the John Quincy Adams administration. There's no foreign policy to be considered here. It's all about domestic. Because the two big factions that come out of this election of 1824, so now we got two factions within that faction, are known as Adams men, as in John Quincy Adams, and Jackson's men. And they divide, and I want you to think about this. Adams men are all about internal improvements. As I said, during the Monroe period, they had reestablished a national bank. They liked tariffs. They wanted internal improvements like roads and canals. And they wanted to link the economies of North, South, and West together through this American system. So they want a involved national government to regulate the economy. I don't know if you're already thinking this, but it's a lot like Hamilton's financial plan. So really, it's just Federalists in disguise. They were not big on expansion at all costs. They thought that that was going to be reckless and unwise. Even though John Quincy Adams is president, really the big guy here, the big thinker, is Henry Clay. He's the brains. He's the Hamilton behind this. He's the brains behind this. Now, Andrew Jackson is much more old school Madison Jefferson Democrat. He wants states' rights. He wants all of the power to be reserved to the states. He hates the American system because he thinks it's too much government involvement. It's government overreach. However, he's very pro-expansion. He thinks that that's what's going to be good for the most number of people in the United States. And when I say people, I mean white people, because he's also they are solidly pro-slavery. Because they believe that that's property and the government has no right to abridge anybody of their property. And so we get these two big divisions, and it's very clear that it's just Hamilton versus Jefferson part two. Now it's Adams versus Jackson. And Jackson gets his revenge in 1828. So this is when we actually get political parties. This other Democratic Republican, Martin Van Buren, who later becomes president, actually forms an official political party to support Jackson to get him to be president, because they don't want this to happen again. They're like, we can't just leave it up to chance and cliques in the government to give us candidates. He forms a actual organization with members and a leader, and their job as a party is to nominate people for office. And so the Democratic Party is formed to support Andrew Jackson's bid for presidency in 1828. Okay, so this is how we get the official Democratic Party. There is open campaigning, so we have left that business of you don't campaign. They actually campaign, and it gets very nasty. Very mean things are said on both sides, particularly Quincy Adams against Jackson, because Jackson had married this lady whose divorce was not final at the time they got married. So she was married to somebody else and divorced him, thought the divorce, or he divorced her, I don't remember, thought the divorce was final, and Jackson married her, and it wasn't final. And so Quincy Adams went around saying he was a polygamist, and then she dies during the campaign, and Jackson blames Quincy Adams, and they call each other mean names. Anywho, you can see, again, just a little vestige of a sectionalism. New England going for the kind of the more Federalist style party, and the rest going for Jackson. But Jackson wins in 1828. Now, when I get back on Wednesday, we're going to talk a whole bunch about Andrew Jackson, so I'm going to leave most of this. I just want to note, or for you to note, this new two-party system. So we now have the Democrats formed to get Jackson in the presidency. Van Buren's going to be his vice president and then later president. And again, states' rights, limited national government, land expansion, anti tariff, pro slavery. And this is going to be like the Democratic thing until the 20th century. So just burn that in your brain for the 1800s, the 19th century. This is the Democrats. Now, as I mentioned when we first talked about our timeline, the Whigs are formed in opposition to Andrew Jackson. You can, I think that timeline's still up there. Well, you can look back in your notes. The Whigs are formed during Jackson's presidency to counter him. And that's Clay. Well, there's two presidents who were Whigs during this time. You don't really need to remember that. You need to remember Henry Clay. They want a stronger national government. They want tariffs, internal improvements. But here's going to be their downfall. They're mixed on slavery, and that will eventually break them apart, which is why we don't have a Whig party. But all of this up here will later just be taken on by Republicans. So, still same division. Now let's look a little bit into the future at how this all goes down. Notice that the Whig Party, 1836, the Democratic Party solidly going for Van Buren, but the Whigs are like not quite officially formed 1836. They're still kind of scatterbrained compared to the Democrats. And so the Democrat wins because these guys are all split up. It gets more solidified by 1840. We get clearly Whigs versus Democrats. Van Buren does not win a second term. That goes to William Henry Harrison, as you can see there. But do notice, like, look at this. Look how, like, scattered. There's no sectional divide at this point between Democrats and Whigs. It's really more, do you like the candidates? Like, we're starting to get into more personality politics rather than kind of positional. We see Henry Clay running as a Whig in 1844. Doesn't quite make it, although we can notice that our electoral college and our popular vote's kind of wacky. But James K. Polk is a super popular war hero guy, so he comes in 44. We get another election in 48. Still not really a sectional divide. And then things are going to get real crazy in the 1850s. Now, I know that's after period 4. This is now period 5, but wait for it, Republicans. So it's like scattered, 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 sectionalism again. And this is the big breaking point over slavery that we'll get to in period 5. All right, so that is just a little bit on the presidents. Obviously, if you have any questions, I'll be back on Wednesday to answer them, or if you have a pressing question that just can't wait, send it via email and I will do my best to respond to you. Hope you guys have a great day.